So Chinese cuisine is just incredibly diverse. And the first few years, I was really focused on Sichuanese cuisine. And of course, it has very bold and exciting flavors. But I think that over time, I've just come to appreciate much more deeply the more subtle and understated cuisines. So, for example, the food of the Jiangnan region, sort of around Shanghai, and also Cantonese food. And Cantonese food, ironically, it's kind of the food that's best known in the West, but it's also least known because real Cantonese food is so delicate and beautiful. And I think that, yes, as I've learned more about Chinese food, I find very satisfying a simple steamed fish or a beautiful soup or these kind of subtle dishes. But I should say that, after 30 years of eating all around China, I'm still discovering new regional cuisines. And, I go to another province or I go to another part of Sichuan and I taste things that I've never had before. It just seems to be infinite in its variety. So I don't think you can sum up Chinese culture in a single dish, because a Chinese meal usually consists of a few dishes together. But let me give an example of something that I think says a lot. So, for example, if you have a meal where you have plain steamed rice, no salt, just plain rice, and steamed grains have always been at the heart of the Chinese diet. So, with your rice, perhaps, I would serve a dish like mapo tofu. So, Sichuanese pockmarked old woman's tofu. So that's tofu in a very spicy sauce with a little bit of minced beef. And I choose this dish partly because it shows some of the regional variety of Chinese cuisine, and also because it uses tofu, which is so central to the Chinese diet and distinctively Chinese. And also it uses fermented bean seasonings in chili bean paste, which we never used in Europe, but are fundamental to the Chinese diet. And another reason is that because it's typical of Chinese home cooking in using a little bit of meat with a lot of a plant food, which is one of the reasons why I think Chinese food is a good example of more sustainable eating. And with the tofu, I would serve a simple stir-fried green vegetable to show lightness, seasonal foods, and then a soup, a very light broth, because Chinese meals almost always include a soup to sort of rinse and refresh the palate. I think the craziest stereotype in the West about Chinese food has been that it's unhealthy. And obviously people came up with this prejudice because of just encountering very simple, Chinese food for Westerners. So fried rice, fried noodles, deep fried. So very tasty, but not very healthy. But actually China is a civilization where people have always insisted on the deep and intimate connection between diet and health. And they say, 药食同源, food and medicine come from the same source. So in Chinese culture, food is medicine. And the first thing you do to address health is you think about your diet. So I think that Chinese people talk about healthy eating, how to eat for health all the time. And I think it's an absolutely essential part of the diet. Well, I think from an environmental point of view, we all know by now that we have to eat less meat and more plant food. And Chinese food just offers a lot of possible solutions. So things like using tofu, not just as a food for vegetarians, but as a food that anyone can eat. And in Chinese cuisine, you find so many dishes made with tofu that are fantastically delicious, as well as being, very made with entirely plant food. And I think also there's a habit in Chinese cooking of what they call 肉边菜, cooking vegetables with meat. So you don't just have a whole steak for one person. You use a little bit of meat or meat stock or animal fat to cook vegetarian ingredients. And so the meat goes further and you're eating less of it, but it's still very satisfying to the senses. And I think the most important thing is that if you want to get people eating sustainably, the food has to be delicious. And Chinese has so many ideas also for using, for example, fermented soybeans as a very rich, intense seasoning. but Chinese food has so many solutions for making plant-based food fantastically appealing to the senses. And they also have a long tradition of explicitly vegetarian cooking as well in the Buddhist tradition. So, how to order a Chinese meal? I mean, there's a bit of an art to it, and there's not one rule. But I think the most important thing is don't go with a group of friends and everyone just order the dish they like best, because there has to be a bit of a system to it. The dishes have to relate to each other. And the most important thing is that you want variety and as little repetition as possible. So if you have one chicken dish, don't order another chicken dish. Then order a fish, vegetable, tofu. And then also try to have different flavors. So if you have one dish that's really spicy and intense, then have something that's very delicate, like maybe some simple stir-fried greens, and have different cooking methods. So if you have one stew in a clay pot, then something that's stir-fried, a soup. And that way it just becomes very interesting and delicious. And if you have something that's dry and deep fried, then you have something soupy. So just think about the meal as a sort of journey of variety for the senses. Well, I think that Westerners have a very limited appreciation of the kogan, mouthfeel or texture of food compared with the Chinese. Because for Chinese people, the texture is fundamentally important. So whenever Chinese people talk about a meal they enjoy, they always end up talking about the texture. And for me, as a foreigner going to China, for a long time, I was confronted with ingredients that I couldn't really understand. So things like jellyfish, transparent, flavorless, slithery texture, or sea cucumber, a very extravagant banquet dish, but again, no flavor itself and this strange, wobbly, gelatinous texture. So at first, I didn't understand these things, but I've come to love them and to enjoy the adventure of a sort of tactile engagement with the food in your mouth. And I think that once you start appreciating texture in food, it's just an extra dimension to gastronomy and pleasure. So I would really encourage anyone to just put aside your prejudices about eating strange rubbery things with no flavor and just try to put something in your mouth and just explore how it feels. And certainly it took me a little while, but now I find food, I guess, much more exciting because it has this extra dimension. I think cuisines always evolve. I mean, a cuisine is a living form of culture which is remade every single day, and it's always an expression of where food is always an expression of where and when it's being cooked. So Chinese food in the West, there are many specific dishes that were invented. Like in every Australian Chinese restaurant, they seem to have mango pancake for dessert. That's not a Chinese thing at all, but it's very much part of Chinese restaurants. But I think it's great. I mean, I think that there's nothing wrong with sort of fusion food, and there's nothing wrong with Chinese food that's been adapted and simplified for Western tastes. I think the only important thing is that you shouldn't judge the whole of Chinese cuisine by the deep fried ice cream you find in Italy or something. China is a huge country with a very diverse cuisine, and British takeaway food. I mean, that's what Chinese food was when I was young, and I loved it. I mean, it's fantastically popular and successful, but there's a lot more to Chinese cuisine than these sort of localized overseas Chinese traditions.